All right, welcome to the Hype Mind. Today we're talking about toxic relationships.
Welcome back to another relationship episode.
So first, let's start by defining a toxic relationship. What is a toxic relationship?
I think it's important to understand when you're discussing toxic relationships that often this is something you seek because of a probably pained and hurt part of yourself that has a poor belief. And the other important thing when it comes to toxic relationships is this is something where I would say it's in your power because it's a personal problem, but you have to take the power and permit yourself, right? Take responsibility, technically, right? If you're in a toxic relationship, there's a certain amount of responsibility you're not taking for yourself. You're either giving away to someone or someone's taking, and you're not stopping them from taking it in the appropriate manner.
Yeah.
That's how I would generally describe a toxic relationship. But I would
I'll just emphasize that, yes.
Key points on taking responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't worry or blame the other person if you're in a toxic relationship.
That's only going to make it worse.
And they are it's not going to solve the problem. And they are overstepping your boundaries. And that's basically what it is. You can't have clear boundaries and uphold them. And then they cross them. And then you don't do anything in response. You don't stand up for yourself and you don't leave.
Right.
If you need to. And
I would say that that's probably the first most important empowering thing you can know if you're in a toxic relationship is your boundaries. That's where it starts. That's where fixing the toxicity and correcting it begins, is taking responsibility for your own boundaries and the role you play in the relationship. Because like everybody always says, it's a two-way street. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. One key point I want to mention is that it slipped.
It's all right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, right. Toxic relationships, they happen. The first thing I want to say is they happen, right? They happen more often than not, because what we don't know is our subconscious mind, our childhood beliefs, our childhood trauma, whatever you want to call it, recognize it, however you see it, that shows up and leads us to places of comfort. And that tends to be a toxic relationship where we are giving ourselves in search of something that we feel we lack.
Yeah. And this comes back to what I remembered. That attraction, a lot of times, is not a choice. So you'll find yourself in these situations, attracted to these situations.
And you won't understand why sometimes.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
So you'll fall into these situations and you got to understand it fell apart because you didn't keep your clear boundaries.
Or you didn't have any to begin with. And that's not always your fault, right? It comes with consciousness. It comes with understanding that your boundaries are your responsibility everywhere, especially in your romantic relationships, but everywhere, right? But if you're not aware that you don't have boundaries, or that you have poor boundaries, or that you let other people, or you depend on other people to create your boundaries, then you're going to find yourself in a toxic relationship, right? So that might be the first thing you learn from this video is identifying that, so you can say, geez, where do I or don't I have boundaries? Maybe you have too many boundaries and your partner can't actually bond with you. And so they're chasing you down because they want to connect with you and you're like pushing them away, right? That is a dynamic too. But it starts with boundaries. Yeah, if you're in a toxic relationship or you're trying to avoid toxic relationships in your future, maybe you found yourself repeatedly in them, it starts with your boundaries.
Yes. And it's not always boundaries for the other person. Sometimes it's boundaries for you.
Yes.
You'll find yourself in a relationship where you know you shouldn't be in, where you know this isn't healthy for you.
Right.
And you continue to stay in it, even though it's not abusive.
Or you continue to seek those styles of relationships out.
Even though it's not like she's not overstepping your boundaries. Like she's just being her, and you're still in this relationship when it's not the relationship you want to be in. Maybe you're looking for a long-term partner.
Well, that's interesting
because you're intoxicated by somebody else. You're intoxicated by their just them and your attraction for them, and you're not willing to let go because you know
you're intoxicated by
you're made for better.
An emotional, I would say partially emotional state that brings you to, well, that's where homeostasis ties in, right? That brings you to a homeostatic state of peace, right? Because you're so familiar with this dynamic, even if it's a toxic dynamic, right? But and that's where I see a lot of people. They get, they go, I'm really attracted to this person. Why am I so attracted to people who are always bad for me, right? I've heard a lot of girls say that, and that's
Yeah.
that's 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 tough, right? Because you're like, I don't feel anything towards other people. I'm always feeling things towards people who are toxic, right? And that's you looking for, well, honestly, value outside of yourself or something outside of yourself, typically value, right? But love, right? And you get it in the basically the dopamine hit in those scenarios,
Yeah.
right? So it's like because you're not getting that sense of excitement of constantly needing to text someone maybe or something, you don't want to have a relationship with anybody else. You don't allow yourself to feel deeper into yourself for a different kind of connection you actually never felt before because you've never experienced it because it's unfamiliar. Um, but I think the first thing, like we said, is recognizing that you're wired to look for certain things because that's what you're familiar with. That's what you grew up as. Those were the beliefs and the boundaries or lack thereof,
Yeah.
and the environments you felt most comfortable in. So you're trying to recreate them as an adult subconsciously. And so you have to be able to pick those things out and say, this is bad for me. I need to create a boundary, and I need to look for people who aren't this way.
Right. And first of all, don't be ashamed of your attraction, but don't let it control your life.
Understand it fully. Seek to figure out where it's coming from, because it's coming from somewhere of a poor belief or a poor, belief, poor thought or story that you told yourself probably as a child, that ways certain people treated you that you said, this is where I'm most comfortable, is being treated like this. And with that comes the poor boundaries and everything else that's messy.
I think a lot of people can realize and notice if they're in a toxic relationship. They might admit it, but one of the hardest part is actually pulling away from it.
Yeah.
And so that's
very,
something
very difficult.
You need to be able to
do. Well, and I can speak from experience. You probably.
Oh, I absolutely could, yeah.
Yeah. But I can say that is really difficult, right? And you have to understand that these are deeply ingrained beliefs. I mean, they have roots deep into your thought process, into your subconscious, which, getting into your subconscious is tough. But they have roots deeply embedded in your subconscious. And you are so comfortable with those scenarios that you don't want change. And so when you're in those scenarios, those are the worst, the hardest to pull away from, because they are meeting the needs that you think you need met and that you're not meeting for yourself. They are meeting the familiarity and the environment that you're most comfortable and accustomed to, and you don't want change, because no matter how painful that comfort is, it's way less painful, so you think, than what you don't know, right? You always fear the unknown more than you do the lousy place you're at. You always fear the unknown more than you do rock bottom, because you think the unknown is lower, and it's actually not, right? The process of finding the unknown actually is very healthy. There's a whole shebang on that.
It's really about altering your perspective in that situation.
Yeah, you have to understand. You have to trust. You have to move forward. Yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of self-trust, which a lot of times that's what you're lacking. That's why you're in those relationships, is because you don't have self-love, you don't have self-trust. But that's where you need to rally the support of anybody who you can to be on your side.
Say that again. Rally.
Yeah, you need to have your friends, helping you. Even that doesn't do it sometimes. I mean, I've been there too, where I've been in a relationship where everybody's like, I think you need to leave, and I was like, this is
right. Like
this is meeting all those poor needs that I have that aren't good, but they're so comfortable that it's so hard to separate yourself from it. So
yeah, it can be like a drug.
Honestly, it is. I think it has the same response. Yeah, doesn't it have the same
you
brain
have that
release?
Dopamine kind of hit. Yeah, from
it's not even dopamine. Sometimes it's the stress reliefs that you're so familiar with, the constant emotional roller coasters is probably the better word. You're so accustomed to a constant emotional roller coaster that you don't want to leave. It's exciting. It's it's familiar, it's all these other things, and you think it's meeting your needs, and so you justify it with the goods and forget the bads and all that other stuff. So
Yeah, and it's very hard to get in your head and try to go through the logic of leaving. But really, I think it's the best thing to do in a situation like that. Just treat it like a band-aid. Hey, yes, you know you want to leave, but the easiest thing is not to tug a little bit, just to rip it off and exit the relationship and break up, because you know this isn't going to be good for you. And I think staying in a toxic relationship just does damage, and you don't want that to happen for you guys.
Well, sure, it's like staying in the same space in life. If you're not moving up the hill, you're definitely not staying still. You're moving backwards.
Actually, first thing I would do is reinforce your boundaries in a relationship. If you see any boundaries crossed that you are crossing, even yourself, even analyze. I'd do this myself. I'd go through what I really want out of a relationship. I'd even write it down. I say, am I crossing these boundaries, right? Is this a relationship I want? And if you see any boundaries being crossed, it's time to correct those and make sure even you're not letting yourself cross any boundaries, or she's not letting, or she's
not letting you cross boundaries, right?
Yes.
Or vice versa.
Then try to correct those as best you can. But in the end, if this is not the best relationship for you, and if this is stressing you out, if you know this is a toxic relationship, the best thing is not to stay there and fix it.
And
if you want to
build
fix
on those boundaries,
it's always about yourself. Going back to the first point of knowing that it's yourself that gets you into this toxic relationship. There's a person that your partner could be as toxic as they could be, but it's your choice and your decision to be in that relationship and to allow whatever type of overstepping your boundaries that she does. You allow that because you're there. But if you're not, like a healthy person would remove themselves from that situation, because they just want to get in that
and this
situation.
This is a great
understand
place
that
to put in a couple
overstepping
points.
your boundaries is a no-go.
There's a couple points here that this is a great place to check yourself for in your relationship or before you get into one. Right? You should be entering a relationship out of love. You should be in that relationship out of love, right? So, when you say you come first, right? That doesn't mean you're being selfish. That means you're genuinely taking care of yourself so that you can take care of everybody else around you, right? Because when you can't fill someone else's cup with an empty cup, right? But that doesn't mean you're always trying to fill your cup. It means you're trying to fill your cup so you can fill everybody's cup, right? But not out of a toxic, I need to give to everybody way, right? Or I need to get back, I need to give so people want to give to me. But you should be in that relationship because you genuinely want the best for that person. And you also are hoping, you believe that this relationship will bring the best for you too. And it's also a good place to note that when it comes to boundaries and recognizing your boundaries and making sure that you're setting proper boundaries, right? Because you can set boundaries and they can be still poor. You can still do it wrong. You can still be like, nope, there's none of this, right? And it's like, and you end up hurting yourself and them because you incorrectly set boundaries, right? So the way to set boundaries is to make sure you're paying attention to yourself so that you can best do what's best for you and them. You pay attention to yourself by looking at your emotions. Where do I need a boundary? What's causing me to become uncomfortable or fearful or emotional or not show up as my best self? Do I need a boundary here? Do I need to, how can I communicate that this is what I need in a relationship? And understand how you guys both dance, so to speak, in the relationship based on what you need and what they need. Because you both have different needs. You're both not going to be like, I need love. Oh, great, let's hold hands. You need communication. And so the way to set those boundaries properly is to make sure you're paying very close attention to yourself, to your emotional responses, to your body when it tenses up, to your, like me, I clench my jaw a lot subconsciously. And so you need to learn yourself, learn when your muscles are tensing up, when your stomach is butterflying, when your arm is twitching, and realize, is this something that is an emotional or psychological response, or is this just a little habit that's not to worry about?
Right.
And that'll help you pick out the areas that you can say, something in this relationship is not working here. I need to communicate properly with my partner. Hey, this makes me uncomfortable. Let's go about it this way in the future, right? And sometimes those are going to be hard boundaries. Those are going to be, we're going to do this because I know that this is best for me. And when I show up at my best, I can properly love you and show up for you. And sometimes, you guys can, it's not just you laying down a wall and saying, that's it. This is how it, that's not loving. So your boundaries that you set should be loving, but with out of respect for yourself, of course.
Absolutely. That's first and foremost right there. If you don't respect yourself, how can you respect someone else?
Yeah.
How can you give for them? You take care of yourself first.
It's the cup thing.
Yep.
If you don't love, if you don't respect, if you don't trust, how are you supposed to be able to provide those? Or how is anybody supposed to be able to do that for you?
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to fill your empty, this isn't a game of whack-a-mole.
Right. Absolutely. And then I think just to review some of the main points was recognize if you're in a toxic relationship and evaluate the boundaries. If you have any or don't, come up with some and see if they're being crossed. And then thirdly, if you after you evaluate those, you know it's not good for you or healthy for you to stay in that relationship, you must end it as soon as you can. I'll tell you about a situation that I was actually in. I was dating this chick. I won't say who she is, but it got to a point where it was me actually. I mean, obviously me. I was the problem because with my own boundaries. I knew I didn't want to be with this girl long term, but I liked her a lot, and that just led to a longer relationship than it should have been. And so I was there wasting my time and on this not unnecessary roller coaster that caused me extra stress in my life that actually made the connection stronger. So when it came time where I knew I must pull away and break up with her, it was, and I'm even surprised by this, one of the hardest things I actually ever done. It's crazy. It's just a breakup. But for me, in that situation, one of the hardest things. And I had to do it like a band-aid and rip it off and basically just keep telling her no because she still wanted the relationship. It was very hard for me to tell her no. But I remember afterwards saying to myself and realizing that that was one of the best things. I think that was the best thing I could have done, was to just break up. And I should have done it earlier.
And there's a couple of points that would also benefit you guys to know. The first is that when you think you're in a situation where you think you're in a toxic relationship, there's a couple things, right? You want to self-reflect, right? You want to take a little time and reflect yourself. You want to reflect with your partner because that's good communication to say, hey, look, this is happening. We're arguing a lot, or I'm always blaming you, or whatever. Like whatever it is, whatever reason showing up that makes you think it's toxic, right? Communicate this. And the other thing is, a lot of times we look for advice from others. The first thing I would say to that is, if they don't have or have never had a relationship you want, I wouldn't take advice from them, right? I'm very selective about who I take advice from, especially on my relationships. So make sure that when you go outside of your relationship, you're getting good advice, because a lot of people don't know what a good relationship looks like. So as you learn to make a good relationship for yourself, it's not going to help your process by seeking information from people who don't know anything about. Everybody thinks they know everything about everything, and they don't.
Yeah.
So make sure your sources outside of you and your relationship are good sources.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you're communicating, as long as it's proper to do so, which most of the time it is. Most of the time, there's no reason why you can't communicate with your partner your own concerns. You should be able. You're in a toxic relationship probably if you can't communicate with your partner that there's a problem, or that you think there is. Yeah. And make sure you take the time.
And that should be a good sign.
Yeah.
To exit immediately.
I always say, go take a night and soberly think through things.
Mm-hmm. That's a great. That's because a great word.
Most people don't do that, or when they do, they take a night to themselves with distractions. Mm-hmm. Whether it's friends or noise or music or something that alters your mind.
Yeah. Well, like
all these are not going to affect an appropriate response.
Yeah.
They're going to
Oh,
cause
goodness,
reactions. They're going to cause emotions.
Absolutely.
How are you going to make a clear choice?
Exactly, especially when you're on a roller coaster ride. And I could tell you from my own experience, on a roller coaster ride, I couldn't think clearly.
Yeah.
I couldn't. It just didn't. Nothing made
I've been
sense
there
in my
too.
head.
Yeah.
And I actually remember that finding the most peace from this high roller coaster ride to like a peaceful state. It was incredible. Just going to church, I found this peace, and
because it's so quiet in there.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's dark.
And that's when
sometimes.
I had clear thought, and that's when I was able to like work through, this isn't good. I know this isn't good. This is unhealthy. And I love how you use sobering there, because in a toxic relationship, just you don't even have to be under substance to not be essentially sober in the mind. So,
and like you mentioned in the beginning, your responsibility. It's yours. When you're taking this time, you need to be able to look at how you're impacting your toxic relationship. Because just like everybody says, relationships are a two-way street, right? And everybody says, but when we get into a toxic relationship, we often blame the other person, right? You need to make sure you're acting out the two-way street belief and saying, how am I contributing to the toxicity of this relationship? Because you always are. You always are. No matter what dynamic you're playing in the drama triangle of victim, rescuer, or persecutor, somehow you're connected in it, and you're, like you said in the beginning, you probably don't have the right boundaries. You're probably not maybe standing up for yourself, or you're always blaming, but you're always contributing because you're a part of it. So don't erase that from the board.
Yes, definitely. And it's, if you're able to not let her cross your boundaries, you should be fine. Like that's only when it gets toxic and dangerous, is when you are allowing consistently for her to cross your boundaries, or for you to cross your own boundaries. Like, for example, you don't want to be, this is not a long-term relationship you want to be investing in, then what are you doing in it in the first place?
Yeah.
And you're in it because your attraction is strong. But that's not why you need to
make this so much longer if I point that out.
Go for it.
And that's an interesting point, right? Because when I date women, this is how I do it, right? And I think this is the best way for everybody to do it. Guys, girls, doesn't matter, right? Go out with them. If I think you could become my girlfriend, then we can keep dating. But the minute I know that you won't meet my long-term goal, right? And everybody has a different long-term goal, right? So you have to be honest with yourself about what that is. Mine would be marriage and children, right? So you need to know what you're shooting for, because you'll never, if you can't define your goal, you'll never be able to get there. So, so that process for me looks like, hey, do I think you could be my girlfriend? Yes, right? And then of course we keep dating, and if we never make it a girlfriend, good, whatever, done, right? But if we do, then it's, as we're dating in a romantic relationship, can you make it to wife? If I think you are worthy of being my wife, great, we keep going, right? But the minute you know that someone is not your long-term goal, but you still have this intense attraction to them, what do you do, right? And that's what Daniel's talking about. Done, right? If that's not going to get you to your goal, you're out. You need to cut your own connection there, and be like, look, lovingly, hey, you're a great person, but this is what I'm looking for out of life, and I don't think we're moving in the same direction. Whatever you got, whatever you have to honestly say. But if it happens so often, like Daniel just said, where you are sitting there and you're going, this is what I want, and I know this person isn't that, but I want this person, and you're like, what's going on? That's toxic. That is bad, because that is that homeostatic state of being comfortable and familiar with it. It's meeting your needs, it's meeting your insecurities, whatever it is. It's meeting that crazy high and low of the roller coaster, the stress and the anxiety and the, what's going to happen, like, what, I don't know, whatever of those things are you, that's danger. So but in that conclusion, make sure you have boundaries, make sure you're setting them, make sure they're not so much of a boundary that your romantic partner can't even connect with you, and pay attention to your emotions and your bodily responses.
All right, guys, thanks for watching. Peace.